Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt. My name is Matt and I'm joined by Stefan today to review Manchester United's summer transfer window. There was a lot of money spent, a lot of money came in as well, and we're going to look in depth at both the outgoings and the incomings as Erik ten Hag looks to bring his club back to the pinnacle of European football and potentially long-term challenging for the Premier League in England. Stefan, I want to start first of all looking at the outgoings, and there are quite a few departures from Manchester United this summer. They brought in a little over €100 million in sales. Scott McTominay, definitely the biggest of that. We also saw some youngsters move on. Overall, what did you make of the business that United did this summer in terms of getting those players out?
Yeah, it felt to be very much like Man Utd really clearing out a number of players who obviously haven't really done a job for them in recent years, or at least maybe looking for some scapegoats to why things didn't really work out as well as they hoped to last season. The most obvious one perhaps being, Jadon Sancho left last minute for Chelsea, a player who never really got going under Erik ten Hag. Equally, Rafael Varane's a player who was heavily criticised last season for either being out of form or kind of perennially injured. Van de Beek's another kind of infamous name at Old Trafford as well. And then there's maybe other guys like Wan-Bissaka, of course, who I think is a perfectly good squad player, but is also a player that maybe kind of teeters on the edge of being whether he's of constant debate from Man United fans as to whether he's good enough, not good enough, etc., etc. So accepting that maybe his time had come at the club and accepting about 18 million euros for him made a lot of sense. And you add to that a lot of kind of younger players they picked up decent money for. And on the whole, I would say, it's some good business from Man United. It really offsets the spending that they've done in recent years. It's something that we haven't really seen a lot of from Man United in terms of really being quite proactive with moving on other players on the kind of periphery of that squad. We're used to seeing Man United spend a lot of money on older senior players and then spending this summer window trying to offset that by selling them off to Turkey or Saudi Arabia or whatever have you. But it was actually kind of more kind of average aged or younger players who they were able to sell on. Some of them have kind of sell-on fees or percentage, receive percentage sell-on clauses, attached. So I'd say a very more proactive window. The only player in there who I think they maybe could have held on to is Scott McTominay, who I think, Ten Hag was quite vocal about when he did leave the club. But as we'll probably go on to talk about with the incomings, they've probably more or less replaced him with almost a man-for-man replacement to an extent. So I doubt Man United fans will miss him too much, even if, it's a bit of a shame to see a youth player move on. But I think on the whole, they've done really well to raise quite a lot of money and move on players that either they didn't want out of the club or really didn't have any prospect of playing first-team football this season.
Yeah, I think the point you make about Scott McTominay is an important one, and I think some people are overlooking how important he has been to them in big moments in the last couple of years. And the game against Brentford last season where he scored a couple of goals in the last couple of minutes to turn 0 points into 3, I know it is very much an outlier in the grand scheme of his career there, but even in the big games that mean the most to fans, he had a phenomenal performance against Leeds at Old Trafford a couple of years ago. I think he scored twice in the opening 3 minutes. United went on to win it comfortably. As a famous goal against Manchester City as well. I just think it's invaluable for any club at any level, but especially at a level like Manchester United, when the majority of players that you have there, yes, they know what it means to play for United, and I'm sure they're really excited to play for United. But someone like McTominay, who it means as much to him potentially as it means to fans, I think at the top level of football that is invaluable, and I think United would have been better served holding on to him. Now I will say as well, a fee just over €30 million for a 27-year-old midfielder not in their first team plans going forward is probably quite a good fee, and maybe that was ultimately what convinced them that a departure for McTominay this summer was the right thing to do. I just think, especially when you're going through a transition like they are going through now with trying to stabilise that squad after having so many managers coming in and out for so many years, they seem to want that era of stability now under Erik ten Hag, giving him that new contract over the summer. I think a constant like McTominay in there could have served them very well, but like you say, they have a replacement in there, and it's definitely a replacement with more quality, but with the injuries we're seeing now, you need depth, and I think United would have been better having McTominay in that squad. But you did mention as well the young players that have moved on. Willy Kambwala, who played quite a bit towards the end of last season with the injuries United suffered at centre-back, he moved on to Villarreal for 10 million. We also saw Hannibal Mejbri go to Burnley, just over 6 million. Facundo Pellistri to Panathinaikos, another 6 million, and Alvaro Carreras, who spent the second half of last season on loan at Benfica, he moved on, and another 6 million. So for young players there, players that aren't really in the question for the first team. That's almost 30 million euro they've managed to bring in there. Has that business impressed you, and did any of those surprise you that they were willing to move them on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think with a lot of these players, you're looking at positions where they've either brought in new players or other players have emerged. In terms of, Hannibal, they've obviously got a lot of kind of box-to-box midfielders. They picked up Mason Mount, for example, last summer, who hasn't even really got started at Old Trafford yet, but started the first two games, if I'm not mistaken. So, it's already a very competitive competitive position. Pellistri, obviously, by all means, a very good young wide player, but Man United already have a number of those players. They already have one very exceptional young player, Garnacho, in that regard, who maybe has stepped in front of him. Equally, the centre defenders as well. Kambwala, by all means, seems like a very good player, but Man United obviously went out and signed a lot of centre defenders this summer. And I completely agree with you about Scott McTominay. He's probably the most obvious one. And I think he maybe just kind of sits at that point where he's either a very, very good backup or squad player for a good team, or he's a starting player for a number of clubs. We've seen in the Premier League, I think it was most notably Newcastle and West Ham who were both in for him, and he would have presumably been a starter at those very ambitious clubs. So he is a great player, but I think, at 27 years old now, he's probably thought himself that, I can't really be a substitute player for the rest of my career at Manchester United. So I can understand why he's been moved on and why a number of these players have maybe moved on. And we haven't even talked about Jadon Sancho, of course, who, could end up being a player who, despite only being 24 years old, could still go on to, develop into the player he once promised to be at Borussia Dortmund. So, yeah, they've moved a lot of players on there, but I completely agree with you. They made a good amount of money from them. I think most of them make a lot of sense, and I'm really struggling to kind of look through that list of players and say Man United might miss them, which is quite interesting because their squad's already in a huge amount of upheavals. There's still a lot of question marks over Ten Hag's team, but I wouldn't say that's because of these players that they've sold on.
On the point of Jadon Sancho, I think it's kind of when you combine it with what Eric Ten Hag said about Scott McTominay, it's, to me, perhaps indicative that the Ten Hag doesn't have as much control over the sales this summer and over the transfers as he would have wanted. And look, there's no secret the disagreements and the fallings out that Eric Ten Hag has had with Jadon Sancho throughout both their time at Manchester United. But we heard at the start of this summer that they put it behind them. Jadon Sancho was reintegrated back into first team training, having been banished last year before that loan to Borussia Dortmund. But even on deadline day, when we were hearing in the media that Jadon Sancho to Chelsea was a real possibility, Eric Ten Hag said in a press conference that as far as he was concerned, Sancho wasn't going anywhere. And then in a matter of hours, he was on his way to London to undergo that medical with Chelsea. So when you look at that, combined with the comments you alluded to earlier about Ten Hag and the loss of Scott McTominay, are you concerned to any degree that maybe Ten Hag isn't making these decisions in the transfer window? Or if that is the case, do you think maybe that's just the way it is in modern football and managers have to be able to deal with that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I think, what we've obviously seen is that Ineos have come in, they're a minority stakeholder in the club, but they're more or less running the footballing aspect of it. And I think they obviously really wanted to make an impression this summer to say, look, we are coming in, we're going to take over the reins, and we're going to prove to the fans that we're on top of things. And the best way to do that is to be proactive, which I think is what they've done in the window. In terms of Ten Hag's comments, I think he really struggles to... either he struggles to intentionally get his point across, or he is intentionally very kind of guarded with his comments. He often said we've already seen him get into arguments with journalists in press conferences this week. After the FA Cup win, he was basically picking a fight with the pundits inside the pitch, almost like it was a personal vendetta. And over the course of the whole season, whenever one of his players was injured, he was very bizarrely guarded about why they were injured. He would explain why they were missing. And that also alluded to the Jadon Sancho thing as well, where he would say one thing in a press conference and maybe the truth would be something else entirely behind closed doors at Old Trafford. So I know his English isn't fantastic. I know he had to also spend a lot of time learning and brushing up on his English before he came to Manchester United. So you obviously do not want to criticise anyone for speaking a second language by any means. But if that's not the case, and this is him just maybe trying to play some sort of managerial spin game, with each of these instances, I think usually it ends up falling flat on its face rather than some sort of Jose Mourinho-esque, Machiavellian pulling of the strings. I think more often than not, Man United fans are just kind of left confused as to what Ten Hag says in public and what the club end up doing. So yeah, I completely agree with you. It was very inconsistent with one player coming and one player going. But I think this is very much a case of the club or Ineos coming in saying, this is how things are going to be done. We're going to make sure there's a squad in place that can achieve the targets we have in place. And that means if they have to move Ten Hag on at some point, there's no way that he can turn around and say, well, I didn't get the players that I wanted, because they do now have a squad, I think, that should be challenging for the top four.
Let's take a look at that squad and the incomings that Man United have seen this summer. Just to remind you all, they brought in Lenny Yoro, 18-year-old centre-back from Lille for 62 million. Manuel Ugarte on deadline day came in from PSG for 50 million. Matthijs de Ligt from Bayern Munich for 45 million. Xerxes from Bologna and Nusayr Mazraoui, another signing from Bayern Munich, for a combined total of 214.5 million euros spent by United. And the first point I want to look at, Stefan, is the centre-backs. And of course, we discussed it a little bit there with Rafael Varane and Willy Kambala going out. But just two came in. I think for a while, maybe there had been talk that United could have aimed to bring in three. I think, first of all, I want to ask you about the quality of these centre-backs. And I know we've not seen too much of Yaro. He picked up that injury in pre-season training and is yet to feature in a competitive fixture for Man United. But two centre-backs in, two centre-backs out. Do you see United potentially having the same issues they had last season with needing to move things around and potentially play the likes of Casemiro back there?
Yeah, or Johnny Evans, who just can't seem to get a chance to retire. It would seem he keeps getting called back up for Man United. Yeah, look, obviously injuries are just something that you can't really get over, and I think no one was obviously planning for Lenny Euro to kind of miss out on the start of his move to Manchester United with that injury. I think it'll probably come down to what happens to Lisandro Martinez this season, to be honest with you. I think when he has played, he's been a crucial player for Man United, particularly in Ten Hag's system, and I think he was just unlucky to get an abnormal amount of injuries last season. If you kind of look over the course of his career, it's not really something that tends to dog him. So I suspect Man United would expect him to have a relatively clean bill of health this summer. Equally, De Ligt's not a player who typically gets injured. So if you have those two players at least fit, you're looking at basically, if I'm not mistaken, 6 central defenders, if you include Johnny Evans for a system that typically plays 2 central defenders, if I'm not mistaken. Then that's quite a lot of it's quite a lot of competition. I suspect if they'd got a decent offer, they would have probably moved on Harry Maguire as well if they could have done so. No, I think they'll be fine. I think obviously Lenny Euro's a really exciting player that Man United fans should get excited about. He's also a little out of Man United's typical profile of players, as I mentioned. The previous kind of administration, if you will, seemed to try and follow this kind of Galacticos route of just signing ready-made players, and that's why we had the likes of Casemiro, Varane, players like that coming in. Ronaldo before that, obviously. You go back, a whole list of kind of players over the age of 20, 29. But Euro is maybe a sign of the way that the club want to kind of scout, identify and sign players in the future, where they still spend big money because of Man United, but they sign players who could feasibly be starters in that team for the next 10, 12 years, assuming that he can make a step up to the degree which I've got really no doubt about. De Ligt's another exciting one as well, I think. That people may have misconstrued why Bayern Munich sold him. It wasn't because he wasn't good, it wasn't because they didn't rate him, it was just simply because they had to sell one of their central defenders. He was the most sellable one compared to Upamecano and Kim. So I do think Man United picked up a decent player there as well. And so I kind of look at those centre-back positions, and I actually think Man United do have good cover there. Assuming obviously Euro returns from injury without any problems, and Martinez can avoid injury as well.
I don't want to drag on the point I made a little bit earlier, the outgoings in terms of Ten Hag maybe not having complete control, but when Matthijs de Ligt came in from Bayern Munich, there was of course the discourse around Eric Ten Hag signing older players or players that he managed previously, and I think we put a lot of content out about the fact that he spent more money than any other manager in footballing history on players that he's previously managed. And within that conversation, Ten Hag actually pointed out again that De Ligt wasn't a target that he had identified. But I agree with you, definitely a brilliant signing. He's a brilliant age profile at 25 years of age. I think for the price that they paid, a player who has the experience that De Ligt has, playing not only towards the latter stages of a Champions League campaign with Ajax, but playing with Juventus, playing with Bayern Munich, and of course the Dutch national team. He knows what it means to play under pressure and to perform under pressure. at that age, he still has a few years of getting better before he hits the peak of his career. So I think United have picked up a very, very good deal there. Moving into midfield, Manuel Ugarte was the main signing in there, like we said, essentially replacing Scott McTominay. Their options in midfield, again, maybe in the grand scheme of things, when you're looking at how much football they're going to have to play with the restructured European competitions, maybe a little bit thin in the defensive parts of the midfield. They have Ugarte, they have Casemiro, Kobbie Mainoo and Christian Eriksen, and of course Toby Collier, who coming up from the youth team is looking to maybe get some more minutes in midfield this season. How would you see United shaping up that midfield in an ideal world for Erik ten Hag this year?
Yeah, I think, much like the De Ligt signing, actually, I think Man United have been quite smart in picking up Ugarte. He's obviously a player who was really highly regarded in Portugal and before moving to PSG. For one reason or another, he just didn't really fit in with the head coach's plans there. And he's basically been put up for sale, and Man United has said, yeah, we'll take him. And like De Ligt, a very good player who just really needs the right club and the right system to get the best out of him. I think Man United desperately needed a defensive midfielder this summer. I know Casemiro has his moments where he still looks like the player he once was at Real Madrid, but in my opinion, there's too far and few between. I think we've already seen it this season alone, where he's really struggled with the expectations of being a club pushing for top four. And I think Ugarte also kind of comes into that team and allows other players to kind of play the way they want to play. Bruno Fernandes, for example, may technically be a kind of central midfielder, but he's really a number 10 or at times even a striker or second striker. Similarly, Mason Mount can play as a number 8 but likes to get forward. I'd even say Kobbie Mainoo, even though he was maybe came into the team as kind of holding midfielder, I actually think he'll probably develop into more of a kind of box-to-box player, or at the very least a player who likes to look forward rather than prioritise his defensive aspects. So Ugarte's stats are outstanding when it comes to breaking up opposing attacks. He's very good at winning one-on-one duels. He's basically like this kind of attack dog that sits in front of the defensive line. And I think if Man United are going to try and play that kind of box-to-box transition football that Ten Hag wants to play, then I think Ugarte could be vital to that, because Casemiro just simply doesn't have the legs to get around the pitch like he maybe once did at Real Madrid. So yeah, I think the midfield actually looks in pretty decent shape. Ugarte, Mainoo and Fernandes, midfield trio, or maybe Mason Mount steps in there and Fernandes moves further up the pitch, works really well for me. And, as we're probably beginning to notice here, I think more or less man for man, most of these signings do make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think like you mentioned there, how some of those midfield players can play in different roles. If it is Mainoo as a defensive midfielder for the forward, or Fernandes maybe as a number 10 or as a false 9 or even out in the wing. I think we've seen a couple of times in the last few seasons that in particular fixtures, Erik ten Hag does like to switch things up a little bit, kind of shy away from that 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, whatever you want to call it. And there's a few games, I think against Man City in particular, where he's gone for a diamond in midfield, and I think he does have the players who can play both of those systems, and he'll be very grateful for that. I still want to mention as well, just so we don't gloss over the signing of Noussair Mazraoui. I think he's an upgrade on Wan-Bissaka, which I think is all Manchester United needed, because when everyone is fit, that Luke Shaw and Diogo Dalot will be the starters for them, and rightly so. So I don't think they were looking for someone to come in and replace either of those in the starting 11. But Mazraoui comes in a little bit more versatile than Aaron Wan-Bissaka. He can play on the right, he can play on the left. He of course has more experience as well at a higher level, and I just think he's much better going forward too. But I think Wan-Bissaka 1v1 defensively, absolutely incredible. I don't think many would disagree to say he's potentially amongst the best in the league, but it's a very, very niche skill set, I suppose, that he has. I don't think it really moves away too much from that. There's his positioning, especially in a Man United shirt, has left a lot to be desired, and I know United fans have often described it as he holds hands with the right centre back, because he gets pulled so narrow, and it creates a lot of issues for United down that flank. I think that's something that they won't have as much if they do need Mazraoui to play. And again, like we're seeing with a lot of teams, and I think we pointed it out quite heavily with our video on Arsenal a couple of days ago, that managers like versatile players, and typically the versatility came in the areas of the pitch further forward, but we're seeing it more with defenders now, and I think Mazraoui is another one who ticks that box. I do want to ask you quickly about Joshua Zirkzee, Stefan, and the signing there from Bologna. I think the biggest compliment you can ever give to a signing like this is that Thiago Motta moved to Juventus and was interested in bringing him there as well. But do you think there's any potential concerns for trying to balance the game time between Zirkzee and Højlund this season?
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how it all plays out when all these players are fit. I do kind of wonder if Xerxes actually been brought in to kind of complement Højlund rather than an alternative. I think Man United fans would have maybe actually liked to have seen another striker be brought in some way, some form or another. Maybe it didn't have to be a young player for 30 or 40 million euros, but maybe just someone who can kind of bolster that position, because I do kind of think Xerxes, although he has already got got a goal to his name since he joined Man United, I think he's a player who maybe tries to flow around the final third. The name that keeps popping into my head, and I don't know if Man United fans will appreciate this, but it's Dirk Kuyt, the former Liverpool player, who didn't really bag a lot of goals and assists every season, but was just such a useful player for Liverpool in terms of providing a foil for other forward players to work really well. Maybe even Thomas Müller at Bayern Munich actually is a kind of similar player, where I just, watching Xerxes on paper, he wasn't particularly impressive at Bologna, but anyone you speak to Bologna would tell you that he was just so crucial to being the facilitator of between midfield and attack, and allowing other players to play off him. And yeah, I think he could prove to be a really, really useful player for Man United. I just don't think he's going to be a number 9 who scores 20 or 30 goals for them. So I think he'll end up maybe helping Højlund develop into the player that Man United want him to be, because Højlund will finally have something to play off. We saw so much of last season where, Højlund very admirably tried to lead that line, but usually there's about 30, 40 yards between him and the next Man United player, unless, Garnacho's really busting a gut to go up and down that wing. So they really need someone in that pocket in front of the striker. I know Fernandes technically should play that role. I know Mason Mount can technically play that role, but for one reason or another, they just simply don't. And I think that maybe could be purpose-built for someone like Xerxes to kind of step in and just offer a bit more kind of presence in the final third for Man United. And I think he's already kind of settled in quite well and done exactly that. So I think he could be a really smart signing. I maybe wouldn't judge him too much on, how many goals or assists he picks up, but he might just be one of those players that fans who obviously watch Man United week in, week out come to appreciate what he does.
Yeah, I think Xerxes will find it a lot easier to settle in than Rasmus Højlund did last year if he's playing in that typical striker position. We know the troubles that Højlund had getting the ball from his teammates at the start of last season. It was very well documented. I don't think that United system was particularly set up for a number 9 for a striker. And again, like we were saying, that Xerxes can play in different positions, but if he is going to be that main man up there, the service is going to come to him a lot quicker than it did to Højlund. So that should enable him to settle in a little bit more. We did go much more in depth on the comparisons and the differences between Højlund and Xerxes in a video we did a few weeks ago with our resident United expert Ewan Robertson. So make sure to check that out if you haven't already. But before we do wrap up, Stefan, it's time to give us our ratings. Out of 10, how would you grade United's business this summer?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think they did really well to get the money that they got for the players that they sold. I think to a man, just about every player they brought in is probably an upgrade on the players that were there beforehand, the most, more or less. But I think there probably was still a room that they could have. There's still places, for example, that team that I think they could have used some extra players. You mentioned they could have probably used another central defender. I think another left back would be really useful. And equally, I do kind of feel like even though they did do a good job of kind of flushing out the kind of players who haven't really done a lot for them in recent years, or selling on the kind of older players, there are still a lot of players in that team that are just kind of, I don't know, they just seem to be kind of walking around Old Trafford with a cloud over their head. Antony's probably the most obvious one. Casemiro's another one. Harry Maguire. I'd even stick my neck out and say something like Marcus Rashford as well. I don't know if Man United had a sit down with him and said, right, it's now or never, what's going on here, because it just seems to be from one season to the next, he's either in vogue or he's just completely out of form. And I feel like Man United maybe could be more proactive with moving a lot of those players on. I can understand if they want to keep Marcus Rashford, I understand that, but there's just really no reason why Antony's still in that team. There's really no reason why Casemiro's still in that team. Equally, Harry Maguire is a player who constantly linked with him every way and nothing really seemed to come of it. So I would give them a lot of credit. I think they did a really decent job this summer, but I guess if I had to find any critique of them, it'd just simply be that they didn't really move on enough of those kind of periphery players. So I'll give them a 7 out of 10.
I agree with a lot of the points that you've made there, and I was leaning towards the same rating as you, 7 out of 10. I think with some of the players that they've held on to this season, you mentioned too in Casemiro and Antony, I think it feels as though it's the easier option for them. It would make so much sense to to get rid of Casemiro in whatever capacity they can. And even if the solution was to bring in a younger player to come in and challenge in that midfield, I think, you know, they're not going to be consistently competing for major honours as they are now. And I mentioned the Premier League at the top of the video. They're not going to be competing for the Premier League this season. And ultimately, that's where Man United need to be. You know, winning an FA Cup every couple of seasons is fantastic. And, you know, there are certain fan bases that would take that in a heartbeat. But for Manchester United, that's not where you need to be. And I think with the slight change we've seen in the approach they're taking signing players, as you said, with Lenny Yoro kind of being out of the norm of what United would buy, I think you need to commit to that if you're going to do it at all. And I don't think they have by holding on to Casemiro and Anthony to a lesser extent in that conversation, but certainly in there too. But also replacing players like for like, getting rid of one and bringing in a better player like McTominay for Ugarte, like with the centre backs, Varane, who, you know, passed his best for De Ligt. That's fantastic and it improves that squad. But when you still have the injury issues that you've had in the last couple of seasons, you need to bolster that squad in terms of numbers. And Man United haven't done that. You know, that left back, they have Malacia and Shaw, who spend more time injured than they spend fit. And then you have to play Mazraoui at left back or Dalot at left back, the other at right back, and suddenly you've no depth at full back. The centre back issues we spoke about, and centre mid as well. So I think the business that they did do was very good, but there should have been a little bit more. So I'll agree with you, and I'll say 7 out of 10 for United and Ten Hag this summer. Let us know in the comments down below your rating out of 10, and give us your reasoning as well. If you agree or disagree with any of the points that we've made, let us know in the comments down below. Hit that subscribe button if you want more of these videos throughout the next couple of weeks. We already have done our analysis of Arsenal and Tottenham's window, so go check those out as well if you haven't already. But for now, as always, thank you so much for watching.